Good morning, everyone. Archbishop Richard Gagnon here. This is our Friday morning report. Thank you for tuning in. It is the Solemnity of St. John the Baptist today. It is the feast day of French Canadians of the province of Quebec, and so we wish them well and pray for them on this very beautiful feast day of the precursor of Jesus, the one who announced the coming of the Lord, St. John the Baptist, June 24th. As I travel around the Archdiocese, I find that many people come up to me and they say, we enjoy the Friday morning report, we enjoy some of the information that comes across there. And so I find that very, very encouraging, and I thank you for tuning in this morning. It's a simple, informal way, you might say, of touching upon some important topics for us. Last week I talked about the elderly, and maybe I stimulated a bit of interest among some of you to follow the teachings of Pope Francis when he comments on the elderly. Because after all, the elderly in our society are a very big and important component of our society, and often they get pushed to the side. And I think we need to keep that very firmly in front of us, the great gift of wisdom and witness that the elderly give not only to our church, but to society in general. Now, on the topic of MAiD, I just mentioned that once again, and I frequently do, just like I do about the question of abortion, only because these questions become very second nature to us in our society. We become used to these things as part of the culture now, unfortunately, and therefore we become complacent. We must always, as Catholics, be vigilant in supporting the sanctity of human life and be very clear about that. And the way that we practice our democratic rights in Canada should reflect those beliefs that we have, because I can't think of anything more important than the value of human life. Now, I was reading the other day in a pro-life publication about a woman in British Columbia who's 30 years old. She has what is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS, and she's chronically ill at 30 years of age, and she applied for MAiD, medical assistance in dying. The unfortunate part of this is that she, like many people, I'm afraid, are in a certain state of perplexity because she cannot obtain the funding to avail herself of specialists in this area, and there's simply no medical treatment for her in the normal course of our medical system. And so it seems that for people like this woman who is suffering so, that MAiD is more available to her than anything else. And so this puts her in a particular perplexing situation. She wants to actually live, she wants to continue to live, but it's easier for her to access MAiD than it is to find medical help and indeed palliative care in some places in Canada. As a matter of fact, as you probably know, it is true. It's easier to get MAiD applied to one than to avail oneself of good palliative care. 1/3 of Canadians have access to palliative care of some kind, and even that's very, very inadequate. We have a reality here where MAiD is considered a treatment, when all else is not available. That's the problem. And I think when you look at the financial situation with cutbacks in the medical system and so on, that there's a great danger that MAiD will increase, and it has. In 2020, the number of deaths due to medical assistance in dying rose 17% in Canada, and that's a very troubling situation. In the province of Quebec, for example, Bill 38 allows MAiD to patients with dementia, and so they sign advance directives. So when they are capable of signing these directives, and if they get Alzheimer's or dementia, then that document will kick in. Unfortunately, with the public hearings in the province of Quebec on the issue of Bill 38, there was not really anyone who was permitted, you might say, that's what it seems, permitted to present a counter-argument to the prevailing trend of allowing these kind of advance directives for people to avail themselves of MAiD. And so once again, we see a certain trend in society. So I think it's very good to keep on top of this, to keep observing this and being aware and educating ourselves about this important factor in our society. It's a growing reality, it's very troubling, and now that we include in many places in Canada, along with palliative care, in palliative care institutions, the services of MAiD at the same time. And with medical costs, cutbacks, with less availability of palliative care, what's going to win out? Medical assistance in dying. So there you have it. So we must pray hard, we must be good observers, and we must practice our democratic rights that enforces the sanctity of human rights in this country. So thank you very much for maybe thinking about that a little bit and paying attention to that. Now, I was also asked the other day, Bishop, I was asked, these people who send in questions, are they really questions they send in to you, or do you make them up? No, I don't make them up. I don't sit down and make them a bunch of questions that I can answer. It doesn't work that way. Janelle receives questions in her office, and I do the best I can to answer them, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, but I do the best I can. So this week, I'm pleased to say that we did receive one question this week. Some weeks it's 3 or 4. This week it's one question. And it goes like this. It's a little different. It says, Your Grace, we see announcements in other dioceses about having an auxiliary bishop in addition to the Archbishop. What is their role and what do they do separate from the Archbishop? For example, the popular Bishop Barron, who served as an auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and then was recently named Bishop of Winona, Rochester. Is that similar to a promotion, the question asks? Well, I don't know if it's a promotion. It certainly means there's more responsibility to do. So auxiliary bishops. Okay, well, first of all bishops are in fact equal. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, is the Bishop of Rome. So all bishops are equal in their stature in the church. Whether you are an auxiliary bishop or you are a bishop of a diocese or an archbishop, the difference is the degree of responsibilities that bishops may have. And these responsibilities differ from place to place and from person to person. For example, the Holy Father is Bishop of Rome, but he is also the head of the whole church. So he has a universal responsibility for the whole church. Auxiliary bishops are appointed actually to assist archbishops or even bishops of dioceses where there are special pastoral needs. They automatically become the vicar general of the diocese. An auxiliary bishop automatically becomes a vicar general. What's a vicar general? The vicar general acts in the place of the bishop in certain circumstances. And so there's certain criteria. In canon law, it says very simply that auxiliary bishops could be appointed because of the size of a particular diocese, or because of the large numbers of people in that diocese, or because a large number of people practice a certain rite within the diocese in large numbers, or speak a certain language where it would be necessary and pastorally advisable to have a bishop appointed to oversee the pastoral care of these kinds of categories. A significant pastoral concern, such as the needs of the urban church in large cities, or indeed a number of immigrants, and so on. So an auxiliary bishop is appointed to assist the bishop of the diocese or archdiocese. And in Canada, we find examples of that. For example, Toronto has an auxiliary or two, Montreal has an auxiliary or two, Quebec City does as well, and even a diocese like Hamilton has an auxiliary bishop as well. And so it happens that when there is an auxiliary bishop, all bishops have an actual diocese of some description. So what is the diocese of an auxiliary bishop? Well, an auxiliary bishop, for example, of Hamilton, Bishop Wayne Lopsinger, and this is the peculiarity of the Catholic Church and its long history, that because the auxiliary bishop cannot be bishop of that particular diocese, he's serving as an aide to the bishop of that diocese, he is made a titular bishop of a non-existing diocese that was suppressed a long time ago. For example, the bishop of, the auxiliary bishop of Hamilton is actually a titular bishop of Gemelli in Numidia. Numidia was a kingdom next to Algeria in North Africa in the early years of the church. And so that diocese was suppressed, but it was a diocese. And the titular bishop remains bishop of that particular diocese. It has to do with the relationship between the bishop and the territory. But you get into all kinds of interesting nuances in the Catholic faith. But the point is that auxiliary bishops are appointed for particular reasons in dioceses where there is pastoral need for that to occur in that diocese. So thank you very much for that question. It's an unusual question. It has to do with what we call ecclesiology. Now, having dealt with our one question this past week, we have, as of yesterday, heard that Rome has approved of the papal itinerary in Canada, and it is on the website. So there's no need for me to go into details on that. But we know that the Holy Father is coming to Western Canada, first of all, in Alberta. He will visit Maskowitz, which is a site of one of the largest residential schools in Canada. As a matter of fact, Alberta had more residential schools than any province in the country. So the Holy Father will visit that particular site of what was once a large residential school near Edmonton, and he will speak with the elders there and residential school survivors, both First Nations and MAiD people. The Holy Father will also visit a urban Aboriginal church, Indigenous church in Edmonton, Sacred Heart, like we have in our own diocese, St. Kateri Tetaquitha in Winnipeg. He will visit that particular church. He will visit Lac St. Anne, which is an ancient pilgrimage site in Western Canada for Indigenous people. It even predates the coming of Europeans to Canada as a place of pilgrimage for the Aboriginal people who believed that the waters of Lac St. Anne were healing waters. And there will also be a large gathering at Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton. And so that is in Western Canada. So the Holy Father's itinerary there is quite busy indeed. He arrives on July 24th and he begins his visit to Alberta on the 25th of July. From Alberta, as we note in the itinerary, he flies to Quebec City. There'll be special meetings with the Holy Father and the Prime Minister, the Governor General of Canada, certain dignitaries. There'll be meetings with Indigenous people in Quebec City. There'll also be a special gathering at Saint Anne de Beaupré, which, like Lac St. Anne, is an ancient pilgrimage site in Canada. And many people will be gathering there. Mass will be said there at Saint Anne de Beaupré. And there'll be a gathering with priests and seminarians there as well. And from Quebec City, the Holy Father goes to Iqaluit in the north to meet with the Inuit people for an afternoon in Iqaluit before he goes back to Rome. So we know that the Holy Father's health is not really that strong, but he is very determined to come to Canada. The theme of the papal visit is walking together. And I think it will go a long way in furthering reconciliation in the country, both between the Church and Indigenous people, and indeed within the country of Canada as a whole. And so we're very much looking forward to that important visit of the Holy Father to our country. We're hoping to work on a little project assisting residential school survivors to go to visit the sites in Alberta when the Pope comes. More will be announced about that. So anyways, the itinerary is on the website. Do have a look at that. And there's also a link to the Vatican website, which gives in several languages the itinerary of the Holy Father, including his visit to Canada. Just press the link that says Inglese, and that means English in Italian. I'm also happy to share with you that our Solidarity Fund is growing. Our Solidarity Fund for Healing and Reconciliation. You know, I was thinking the other day that even though, you know, these are challenging days for the church, there's no doubt about it, but people, our Catholic people, have always been and continue to be people who look forward, moving forward, and they continue to help their neighbors. They continue to want to further reconciliation and healing. And so in spite of all the challenges that you read about in the papers and this sort of thing, our Catholic people in the Archdiocese of Winnipeg continue to support reconciliation and healing. And so I was able to, with the Solidarity Fund, so far we've achieved about half of our amount of $660,000 for healing and reconciliation. We've been able to make a substantial donation this past week to the Assiniboia Residential School Legacy Group project, which will be a memorialization of Assiniboia Residential School in the city of Winnipeg, just off of Academy Road. There'll be a orientation center that's built there, and the Archdiocese of Winnipeg will be an important contributor to that project because of the Solidarity Fund. As we move into the fall, I'll again have another fundraising drive for our Solidarity Fund. I hope you do become involved in that to further the work of healing and reconciliation. I spoke to the board of the Assiniboia Residential School Legacy Group. They were really pleased with our participation. They convened a special meeting of all their board members and myself. I talked to them and met them via Zoom and had a great conversation about the history of Assiniboia Residential School right in the city of Winnipeg in our local neighborhood off of Academy Road. And finally, the last point is that the World Meeting of Families is in Rome this year. Every so many years, there's a meeting for the coming together of Catholic families. And the World Meeting of Families is in different cities around the world every so many years. It's the largest gathering of Catholic families in the world. And this year they're meeting in Rome, and they're celebrating the end of the Year of the Family. Amoris Laetitia, Year of the Family. Of course, Amoris Laetitia is the post-synodal apostolic exhortation written by Pope Francis on marriage and family. The joy of marriage, the joy of love, written by Pope Francis. And this past week has been a week in which many aspects were discussed and shared by these Catholic families around the world. It's promoted by the Dicastery for families, for laity, family life, and sanctity of life. And here's a quotation. The World Meeting of Families promotes the pastoral care of families, protects their rights and dignity in the church and in civil society, so that they may ever be able to fulfill their duties. Now, we sent two couples from the Archdiocese. We have John and Cheryl Acosta. John is the Pastoral Services Coordinator for the Archdiocese, and we also have Rick and Chantal Debin from Shoal Lake. And these two couples represent the Archdiocese going to the World Meeting of Families, and we look forward to hearing from them and the many experiences that they have experienced this past week in Rome. The talks, the various keynote addresses, the celebrations, and so on. So as we conclude our Friday morning report, here's a couple of very short little video clips that John took to share with you about the World Meeting of Families in Rome. Well, I hope that gave you some idea of the World Meeting of Families, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. May God be with you and bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.